I have been working on taking my 2D side scroller from this to that and then finally this. And this is how I did it. The goal of Skate King is for you to travel between different areas until you eventually reach your throne. The issue is that with it being a 2D game, how do I show that the player starts in a suburb and then ends up in a skate park? You're probably already thinking, change the props obviously. The thing is, I'm not an artist. My skills are limited to simple props in my basic art style that fits well in the foreground. Where my limitations are met is when it comes to making convincing parallax background. Having a great background adds a level of depth to an otherwise quite flat game, and by using a parallax effect, we can convey a greater sense of player progression. Luckily for us, or me, the player will be constantly moving in Skate King, so the backgrounds do not need to be very detailed. Actually, keeping them simple is actually for the best, because having them too detailed may create a slightly dazzling blur effect, and that can make the character both hard to see, or just make the player feel a bit queasy and nauseous while playing the game. So, the TLDR is that I wanted a background, but I can't draw. So I came up with a simple 3-step solution to this. First, I fill the background with low poly models. Second, I add a toon shader material to create simple shadows and make them better fit the art direction of the game. Third, I pixelate the objects to make them better fit into the pixelated world of Skate King. Alright, okay, here's my process. Initially, I blocked out the areas that I wanted to have 3D objects in them to get a sense of scale, layout, and what type of 3D props I will need and want. Also, I need to test if this method will even look good to begin with. Once happy, I jump into Blender. For single props like a bus stop, tree, or a car, I just created and modeled the whole thing in Blender. I am not about to do any unwrapping and texturing. Instead, I assign material slots to the different faces in Blender. Then in Unity, I created a toon shader material in a desired color and then slapped that on it. For larger props like houses, to be fair, that's the only large props in the game, I created a modular house kit and then assembled them in Unity. I saved each house type as a prefab, so I could drag and drop them into the game, scale, and then also change the materials on them to create a sense of variation between each house. Speaking of variation, for things like trees and bushes, simply rotating them or slightly scaling them up or down is enough to stop them from looking uniform, even if you're only using 2 or 3 different tree types. If you want a quick breakdown on how to make a toon shader in Unity Shader Graph or /and how to make low poly models in Blender, these 2 are great videos. Skate King has a day and night cycle, but since that uses the 2D lighting system, it doesn't affect the 3D background objects. Thankfully, the shade I'm using has a max brightness value, so if I can lower that value, that will also create an effect that everything gets darker in the background. The day and night cycle is controlled by the player's progression throughout the level. Whenever the player moves forward, a time of day change event is fired. So what I did was set up a lighting manager that listens to that and then dims the max value of all the materials I'm using in the background to match the time of day of the foreground with the background. Also, I don't know why I did this because I don't think many players will see it, but just for the sake of it, I added a couple of animation scripts to the playground background objects just to add a little bit of movement in the background, even though the player is likely just gonna blitz past it. So, in closing, if you can't draw, consider using low poly 3D objects to cheat. If you want more good advice like that, consider subscribing.